The diner was alive with its usual weekend energy. The clinking of plates and the murmur of conversation filled the air. People laughed over coffee, and the smell of fresh pancakes and bacon lingered in the room. It was the kind of place where regulars were greeted by name and the staff knew almost every face. The sun was starting to set outside, giving a soft golden glow through the large windows, making the small tables shine warmly. Among the busy staff, there was a waitress who moved gracefully between tables, her steps quick but careful. She had a kind smile and eyes that seemed to notice everything happening around her. Customers appreciated her friendliness, and many of them had grown used to her cheerful greetings. Despite the rush, she never lost her composure and always seemed to carry herself with a quiet strength. Her apron, neatly tied, carried a few stains from the day's work, but she didn't mind. It was a sign of effort and care. As she balanced a tray filled with plates of food, she glanced toward the door. A group of bikers had just entered. Their leather jackets and worn boots made a sharp contrast to the bright and cozy atmosphere of the diner. The soft hum of conversation seemed to pause for a moment as eyes turned toward the newcomers. They weren't quietly slipping into a booth. Their presence was loud, and there was an air of tension that immediately drew attention. The waitress felt a small knot form in her stomach. She had served many different kinds of customers, but there was something about this group that made her uneasy. They carried an air of authority, or maybe intimidation, that didn't belong in the cheerful environment. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that she had faced difficult customers before. Her professionalism kept her calm, even as she prepared for what might come next. The bikers moved toward a corner booth, and the diner seemed to shrink around them. Chairs scraped against the floor as they pulled them out noisily. One of the bikers, who appeared to be the leader, had a stern look and a sharp gaze that swept across the room. He laughed loudly at a joke only he seemed to understand, and the sound bounced off the walls, drawing more attention to his presence. The waitress approached the table, tray still in hand, and greeted them politely. "Good evening, can I get you started with some drinks?" Her voice was steady, even though her heart was beating a little faster. She kept her smile in place, hoping it would help set a friendly tone. The leader's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary. He smirked, and the corner of his mouth curved in a way that made the waitress feel slightly uncomfortable. She shook off the feeling, reminding herself that she was there to do her job. "Just water for now, thank you," he said, his voice low and firm. She nodded and stepped back, making a note to return quickly with their drinks. The other bikers were talking among themselves, slapping the table and making jokes that were a little too loud for the small space. The waitress tried to focus on other tables, taking orders and serving food, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the leader's gaze kept following her. She told herself it was probably nothing, just a trick of the mind, but the tension in her chest didn't ease. As she brought the water to the table, the leader leaned back slightly and watched her. "Make sure we get the best service," he said casually, but there was a sharpness underneath his words that made her pause. She kept her smile polite and replied, "Of course, I'll be right back with your menus." Once she left, she took a deep breath and tried to refocus on the other customers. A few regulars shot her sympathetic glances, sensing that something was off. She nodded slightly at them, acknowledging their concern without saying a word. She was determined not to let the bikers ruin the evening for anyone, including herself. The diner continued to hum with life, but every now and then, the leader's laugh or the sound of a chair scraping sharply against the floor reminded her that the tension hadn't gone away. She moved with practiced grace, bringing orders to other tables and clearing empty plates, all while keeping an eye on the corner booth. Her mind ran through different scenarios, thinking about how to handle the situation if it got worse. She knew she couldn't show fear, but she also had to stay safe. Some of the bikers began to notice the other diners, giving curt nods or grunts as they passed by. They had an energy that was hard to ignore. The waitress noticed a few customers glance nervously at the group, some lowering their voices and others pretending not to notice. The atmosphere, once light and easy, had shifted slightly, and the tension was now an invisible presence that everyone felt. Despite the unease, the waitress continued her work, taking orders and delivering food with a calm professionalism that impressed some of the regulars. They whispered small words of encouragement or offered her a smile, recognizing her effort to maintain normalcy under pressure. She appreciated the support even if it was silent. It reminded her that she wasn't alone in the situation, and it gave her a little strength to keep going. As the evening wore on, the leader of the bikers seemed to grow more comfortable in the diner, and his attention occasionally drifted back to the waitress. She noticed it, but she kept her distance and maintained her friendly demeanor. It was a delicate balance, keeping herself professional while feeling the weight of someone's unwelcome gaze. The waitress moved between tables, carrying plates of food and refilling drinks. Her movements were smooth, almost like a dance, but underneath there was an alertness that kept her ready for anything. Every step was careful, and she avoided turning her back completely toward the bikers. The tension was manageable for now, but she knew it could escalate at any moment. Outside, the last light of the sun faded, and the diner's interior lights glowed warmly, casting shadows across the floor. The smell of fresh coffee and baked goods mixed with the faint scent of leather from the bikers' jackets. It was a strange combination, the cozy warmth of the diner clashing with the intimidating presence of the group. The waitress paused briefly near the counter to catch her breath. Her hands were steady, and her smile remained intact, but inside she was acutely aware of the delicate situation. She reminded herself that she had handled difficult customers before, and that she could handle this too. The key was to stay calm, stay professional, and keep the atmosphere as safe as possible for everyone around. As she moved back to the bikers' table with their menus, she took a slow, steadying breath. She placed the menus down gently and asked if they were ready to order. The leader's eyes met hers for a moment, and she held her gaze confidently. He nodded, and she noted their orders carefully, her pen moving quickly across her pad. Walking away, she exhaled silently, feeling a mix of relief and tension. She knew the night was far from over, but for now she had managed the first challenge. Her determination to handle the situation with dignity and care was strong, and she quietly vowed to keep herself and the diner safe, no matter what might come next. The diner's energy continued around her, the sounds of laughter and conversation mingling with the occasional clatter of dishes. She felt the weight of the evening settle onto her shoulders, but also a sense of quiet resilience. She knew she couldn't predict what would happen next, but she could face it head-on with professionalism, courage, and a steady heart. The waitress returned to the bikers' table with their drinks, trying to keep her voice light and friendly. She set the glasses down carefully, making sure not to spill a drop. "Here you go. Are you ready to order?" she asked, keeping her eyes level and her tone calm. The leader smirked and leaned back in his chair, resting one arm along the back. "Take your time," he said, his voice low but filled with a certain edge. The waitress nodded and stepped back slightly, pretending to focus on other tables, but she could feel his eyes following her movements. She tried to remind herself that he was just another customer, but the way he watched her made it impossible to ignore. As she moved away, one of the other bikers began making loud, teasing comments. They were not kind remarks. They were rude and meant to make her feel uncomfortable. She could hear them clearly, even as she served other tables. She kept her head up and continued her work, placing plates in front of diners with a smile, answering questions politely, and refilling drinks. Every movement was careful, measured, and precise. She had learned long ago that staying calm and professional could prevent situations from escalating. But the tension in the diner was becoming harder to ignore. One of the bikers got up suddenly, brushing past a few tables in a loud, deliberate way. The waitress froze for a brief moment, then forced herself to breathe slowly and continue. She could feel the stares of other customers, some worried, some unsure what to do. A couple of the regulars whispered to each other, concerned about how the situation might develop. The waitress's colleagues exchanged quiet glances, signaling that they had noticed the tension too. Everyone was hoping it wouldn't escalate further, but there was a sense that something might happen soon. The leader of the bikers leaned toward the waitress's path as she returned with a tray of food for another table. "Hey," he said, his voice loud enough to make her stop. "Bring us some extra napkins, and don't forget to smile while you do it." She felt a flash of irritation but held it back. "Of course," she replied evenly, forcing her lips into a polite smile. She grabbed the napkins from the counter and walked to their table, aware that every movement was being watched. The leader's smirk didn't waver, and she felt the weight of his gaze on her back. She placed the napkins carefully on the table and stepped back, trying to appear confident even as her heart raced. The other bikers chuckled at the interaction, clearly enjoying the discomfort they were causing. The waitress noticed the way their eyes moved around the room, taking in the diners, the staff, and the small details of the diner. It was clear they were there to assert themselves, to make their presence known, and to intimidate anyone they could. She returned to her other tables, serving food and taking orders, all while keeping an eye on the bikers. Her movements were steady, but her mind was alert, thinking of ways to keep the situation under control. Every small task, every interaction with a customer was a reminder to herself to stay professional and composed. She could feel the tension building, like a storm waiting to break. The leader of the bikers leaned back and called out to her again. "You're doing fine. Keep it up," he said, but there was a tone in his voice that made it clear he was testing her. She nodded, keeping her voice steady. "Thank you," she replied and moved away, forcing herself not to react to the undercurrent of menace in his words. As she walked toward the kitchen to pick up an order, one of the bikers made a loud, unnecessary comment about her appearance. It was crude and disrespectful, and she felt a flash of anger, quickly smothered by professionalism. She reminded herself that responding could make the situation worse. Instead, she took a deep breath, kept her back straight, and continued with her work. The other diners shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the comment but unsure how to help. She reached the kitchen and explained the order to the cooks, who were quietly aware of the tension at the bikers' table. They worked quickly, and she carried the plates back to the appropriate tables, carefully avoiding drawing more attention to herself. Each step was deliberate, each motion practiced as she navigated the crowded diner while keeping the bikers in sight. The leader stood up suddenly, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. He moved closer to the waitress, and she felt her pulse quicken. "You're good at your job," he said with a smirk. "But let's see how you handle a little pressure." She swallowed hard but maintained her composure. "I'll do my best," she replied calmly, refusing to give him the reaction he wanted. She kept her distance, making sure there was a safe space between them, while remaining polite and professional. Her mind raced, thinking about how to handle whatever might come next without causing a scene or putting herself in danger. The biker laughed and returned to his seat, but the effect of his words lingered. She moved quickly to another table, checking on customers and answering questions, trying to appear unfazed. The other diners whispered to each other, exchanging glances that suggested both concern and admiration for how she handled the situation. Her colleagues offered small, encouraging nods from across the diner, giving her a sense of support in the tense environment. Throughout the evening, the bikers continued to make subtle, teasing remarks, testing her patience and composure. She responded with calm professionalism each time, keeping her voice steady and her movements precise. She learned to read their behavior, noticing the moments when they were looking for a reaction and the moments when they were simply making noise. Her focus remained on providing good service to all the diners, even as the tension at the corner booth continued to grow. A few of the bikers began moving around more, making it clear that they wanted to be noticed. The waitress adjusted her movements to keep a safe distance, all while ensuring that every table received attention. Her professionalism became a shield, protecting her from the direct intimidation while keeping the atmosphere of the diner as normal as possible. At one point, a regular customer attempted to intervene, offering a friendly comment to lighten the mood. The biker responded with a dismissive gesture, showing that he was in control of the situation in his mind. The waitress recognized the importance of letting the moment pass without confrontation. She continued her work, calmly refilling drinks, clearing empty plates and checking on tables, all while keeping an eye on the bikers. The leader seemed to grow more comfortable with the situation, his smirk never fading. Yet the waitress noticed the small cracks in his demeanor, the way he occasionally looked around at the other diners. It gave her a subtle sense of hope that he was not entirely confident in his dominance. She held on to that thought, using it to steady herself as she moved from table to table. Despite the discomfort, she managed to keep the flow of service steady. The diner continued its rhythm with laughter, conversation, and the clatter of dishes filling the room. She found small moments to breathe, adjusting her pace when possible, and reminding herself that staying calm and professional was the best way to handle the situation. As the night wore on, the tension at the bikers' table remained, but the waitress continued to manage it with quiet strength. She was aware of every glance, every movement, and every word, using her focus and experience to maintain a sense of order. The diner, while uneasy, continued to function, thanks to her calm presence and careful handling of the situation. By the end of the part of the evening, she had established a routine of sorts, moving through the diner with grace and professionalism while navigating the difficult presence of the bikers. She remained vigilant, aware that the night could still hold surprises, but her confidence and dedication to her work gave her the strength to face whatever might come next. The tension was still there, but she had found a way to manage it, keeping herself and the other diners safe while maintaining her dignity and composure. The diner was filled with a mix of laughter, clinking dishes, and the low hum of conversation, but there was a tension that grew heavier near the corner booth. The bikers were no longer just a background presence. Their energy seemed to ripple through the room, making every movement of the waitress feel sharper and more calculated. She moved with grace, but her mind was alert, anticipating the next wave of discomfort that might come from the table she dreaded. The leader leaned forward, resting his arms on the table, and spoke in a voice meant to carry across the diner. "You're pretty quick on your feet," he said, his words carrying a hint of challenge. The waitress paused, taking a deep breath, then smiled politely. "Thank you. I try my best," she replied, keeping her tone calm and measured. She knew that showing irritation could escalate the situation, so she carefully avoided any hint of frustration in her voice. One of the other bikers laughed loudly, making a crude joke about her appearance. The comment was meant to embarrass her, but she stayed composed, forcing a polite nod and continuing her work. She was aware that some of the diners were watching, and she didn't want to create a scene that might cause more discomfort for everyone. Her professionalism became a shield, protecting her from the immediate impact of the harassment while allowing her to maintain control over her own actions. As she moved toward another table with a tray of food, she felt a sudden nudge at her shoulder. One of the bikers had reached out, seemingly playful, but it was meant to intimidate. She froze for a fraction of a second, then gently moved away, keeping her voice steady. "Excuse me," she said quietly, ensuring her words didn't escalate the situation. The biker chuckled, leaning back in his chair, clearly amused that he had provoked even a small reaction. Her colleagues exchanged worried glances, aware of the growing tension. They kept their distance, unsure how to intervene without making things worse. The waitress felt their silent support, and it gave her a small boost of courage. She reminded herself that she was not alone, that the staff and the other diners were quietly rooting for her safety and composure. The leader of the bikers began to make more pointed remarks, his voice low but filled with an undercurrent of aggression. "You're good at your job," he said, "but I wonder how far your patience goes." The words were meant to test her, to push her boundaries. She held her posture straight, her smile polite, and replied evenly, "I'll do my best to help everyone tonight." He smirked, clearly enjoying the subtle power he felt over her. One of the bikers spilled a drink on the edge of the table, laughing as if it were a joke at the waitress's expense. She took a steadying breath and walked over with a cloth, cleaning the spill efficiently. Her movements were deliberate, precise, and calm. She made eye contact with the leader, silently conveying that she would not be intimidated or rushed into showing fear. Other diners watched quietly, some uncomfortable, some impressed by how composed she remained. The staff whispered reassurances to each other, taking care not to draw attention, but it was clear that everyone felt the tension. The waitress could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but she refused to let it control her actions. She reminded herself that maintaining professionalism was the key to keeping the environment as safe and calm as possible. The leader got up, walking toward the waitress with a deliberate, slow pace. He leaned slightly, close enough for his voice to carry to her without being overheard by the entire diner. "You're handling this well," he said, "but I wonder what you would do if things got a little more personal." She felt a shiver run down her spine, but forced herself to remain calm. She met his gaze directly, her voice steady. "I'm here to help everyone enjoy their meal," she said simply. She kept a safe distance, her hands empty, ready to retreat to a more populated area if necessary. Her heart was racing, but she focused on breathing and thinking clearly, aware that any sudden movement or reaction could escalate the situation. One of the bikers began tapping on the table with his fingers, creating a loud rhythm that drew attention from the nearby tables. The other diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispering to one another. Some moved slightly closer to the waitress, offering silent support. She noticed and appreciated the small gestures, feeling bolstered by the quiet solidarity. The leader returned to his seat, but the tension lingered. His presence was like a shadow over the corner of the diner, and the waitress moved with heightened awareness, attending to every table with careful attention. She adjusted her route, keeping herself near other diners when possible while still fulfilling her responsibilities. Each movement was a delicate balance of serving her customers efficiently and ensuring her own safety. At one point, a customer accidentally bumped into the biker leader, and he glared sharply at them. The waitress quickly intervened, politely apologizing for the disturbance and helping to ease the tension. Her calm demeanor prevented the situation from escalating further. She realized that part of her role was not just serving food, but also managing the dynamics in the diner to prevent conflicts. The leader watched her closely, as if studying her reactions, looking for any sign of weakness. The waitress noticed and maintained her composure, smiling politely at him while keeping her movements steady. She knew that the key was not to react emotionally, to remain calm, and to continue her work without giving him the satisfaction of seeing her flustered. She took a deep breath and focused on the rhythm of the diner, the clinking of plates, the murmur of conversation, the laughter of families. It was a small anchor, a way to center herself amidst the tension. She reminded herself that she had faced difficult situations before and had always found a way to navigate them safely. This was just another test of patience and composure. The bikers continued their loud, disruptive presence, occasionally making remarks that tested her patience. She responded with professionalism each time, keeping her voice steady, her posture upright and her movements deliberate. The other diners seemed to relax slightly as they noticed her calm handling of the situation. Her composure became a silent reassurance that the environment was still under control. Despite the harassment, she found small moments of connection with other diners, offering smiles and polite conversation. It was a reminder that not everyone in the diner was focused on the disruptive group. These moments of normalcy helped her maintain balance, allowing her to continue serving efficiently while remaining aware of the corner booth. As the evening wore on, the tension in the diner reached a subtle peak. The bikers' behavior was becoming more aggressive, their comments sharper and their gestures more deliberate. The waitress felt the pressure but refused to show fear. She continued to move among the tables, attending to orders, refilling drinks and clearing plates, all while keeping a careful eye on the bikers. She noticed a few of the diners starting to subtly shift closer to each other, whispering and watching the situation unfold. The energy in the diner was a mixture of unease and admiration for the waitress's ability to handle the harassment with dignity. She drew strength from their silent support, knowing that her actions were making a difference in maintaining a calm environment. At the same time, she prepared herself mentally for the possibility that the situation could escalate further. She had considered safe exits, ways to call for help, and strategies to diffuse tension without confrontation. Her experience and foresight gave her a sense of control, even in a situation that felt unpredictable. As she delivered another tray of food, she glanced at the leader, who seemed to be observing her closely. His smirk suggested he was testing her, trying to see how far he could push her patience. She met his gaze calmly, her smile steady, and silently reaffirmed her resolve. She would not give him the reaction he wanted. The diner continued to hum with activity, the background chatter, laughter, and the clatter of dishes providing a rhythm that grounded her. She moved with deliberate care, attending to every customer while managing the subtle threat posed by the bikers. Her focus on her work, combined with her awareness of the situation, allowed her to navigate the evening with quiet strength. Even as the bikers continued to make disruptive comments and gestures, she remained composed, a steady presence amid the tension. Her professionalism and calm demeanor acted as a shield, protecting both herself and the other diners from the worst of the harassment. Each interaction, each careful step, reinforced her confidence and her ability to maintain control of the environment. By the end of this part of the evening, the waitress had managed to maintain her composure and dignity, despite the increasingly aggressive behavior of the bikers. She had balanced service, awareness, and professionalism, keeping the diner functioning smoothly while navigating a situation that could have easily spiraled out of control. The tension was high, but she had proven her resilience, setting the stage for whatever would happen next in the unfolding drama. The tension in the diner had reached a point where it was impossible to ignore. The clinking of dishes and hum of conversation seemed almost muted against the presence of the bikers in the corner. The waitress moved from table to table, her movement steady but her senses sharp, aware of the looming threat from the corner booth. Every glance in her direction, every loud laugh from the bikers made her pulse quicken, but she refused to let it show. She had managed so far with professionalism and calm, but she knew it was only a matter of time before the situation escalated beyond her control. Suddenly, the front door opened and a new presence entered the diner. A large, confident figure walked in, carrying an air of authority that immediately shifted the energy in the room. People turned slightly to look, sensing that something different had arrived. The man moved with purpose, his steps deliberate. Yet there was a calmness in his demeanor that contrasted sharply with the biker's aggressive energy. The waitress noticed him immediately, a flicker of hope passing through her. She continued to serve tables, but her eyes occasionally darted toward the newcomer. He scanned the diner quickly, his gaze sharp yet non-threatening, and the moment he saw the bikers in the corner, his expression hardened just slightly. It was clear that he had noticed the tension and was assessing the situation. The leader of the bikers had not noticed the man yet, still focused on teasing the waitress and showing off to his companions. The newcomer approached the counter, speaking briefly to the staff, his presence commanding respect without a hint of arrogance. He seemed to radiate a quiet authority, someone who could take control of a tense situation without needing to raise his voice or make threats. The waitress continued her work, but she couldn't help stealing glances at him. She had felt increasingly powerless despite her composure, and this new presence brought a small but noticeable sense of relief. The other diners noticed too, some whispering to each other, feeling that the balance in the room might finally be shifting. The leader of the bikers finally became aware of the newcomer's presence. He squinted slightly, trying to gauge the newcomer's intentions. There was a pause, a subtle tension in the air as the two men's gazes met across the diner. The biker seemed to be trying to assert his dominance, but he had underestimated the calm confidence of the newcomer. The room felt charged, every diner aware that something was about to change. The newcomer walked toward the corner booth slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving the bikers. He spoke clearly but not loudly, addressing the leader directly. "I think it's time to respect everyone here," he said, his voice calm yet firm. The words cut through the hum of conversation and laughter, and for a moment there was silence in the diner. The leader blinked, momentarily thrown off by the calm authority in the man's tone. The waitress felt her shoulders relax slightly, a small breath of relief escaping her lips as she saw the biker's reaction. The leader leaned back, trying to mask his unease with a smirk, but the newcomer's presence was undeniable. His gaze was steady, unwavering, and the biker could not help but notice that he was not intimidated in the slightest. The bikers exchanged quick glances among themselves, sensing that the energy in the diner had shifted. They had come to assert dominance, to intimidate and provoke, but now they were confronted by someone who clearly commanded respect without aggression. The waitress watched, silently grateful as the newcomer continued to stand calmly by the booth. The leader finally spoke, trying to maintain his facade of control. "Who are you to tell me what to do?" he asked, his voice carrying a mixture of challenge and curiosity. The newcomer responded without raising his voice. "I'm someone who believes no one should be made uncomfortable here," he said simply. His words were straightforward, yet they carried an unshakable authority. The waitress moved slightly closer, still keeping a respectful distance, but she could feel her hope rising. The other diners watched quietly, sensing that the conflict might finally be diffused. The bikers seemed unsure how to respond, their previous confidence wavering as they realized that the newcomer was not someone to be intimidated or dismissed. The newcomer didn't need to raise his voice or make threats. His presence alone was enough to command attention and respect. He continued to speak calmly, making it clear that the diner was a place for everyone to enjoy their meals safely and without harassment. His tone was firm, yet there was no anger, only a quiet insistence on fairness and decency. The leader of the bikers shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The previous smirk was gone, replaced by a faint uncertainty. The other bikers glanced at each other, sensing that the dynamics had changed. They had not expected resistance like this, and certainly not from someone so composed and confident. The waitress noticed the subtle shift in energy and felt a surge of gratitude. For the first time since the bikers had entered, she felt that the situation might be manageable without further harassment. Her confidence grew slightly as she observed the newcomer's calm handling of the situation. He was not aggressive, but his presence alone had created a barrier between her and the bikers. The leader tried one last attempt at intimidation, leaning forward with a challenging look. "You think you can tell me how to behave?" he said, his voice carrying a mix of defiance and uncertainty. The newcomer held his gaze unwavering. "I don't think," he replied calmly. "I know that everyone deserves respect. That includes the people here tonight." The words struck a chord, and the bikers exchanged glances that suggested hesitation. Their energy, once loud and aggressive, now felt subdued. The newcomer's presence had shifted the balance in the diner, creating a protective bubble around the waitress and the other diners. She moved slightly behind him, feeling the relief wash over her, knowing that the situation was now under control. The diner itself seemed to breathe a little easier. The other diners, previously tense and uncertain, relaxed as they observed the newcomer's calm intervention. Whispers of admiration and relief passed between tables, though no one spoke too loudly. The presence of someone willing to confront the bikers without aggression had a stabilizing effect on everyone in the room. The leader of the bikers leaned back, his smirk gone, replaced by a mix of uncertainty and irritation. The other bikers began to shift in their seats, glancing around the diner, sensing that their usual tactics of intimidation were no longer effective. The waitress, while still vigilant, felt safer and began attending to other tables again, her movements regaining a smoother rhythm. The newcomer remained near the corner booth, his calm demeanor unwavering. He didn't need to speak often. His posture and steady gaze conveyed enough authority to keep the bikers in check. The energy in the diner had changed completely, with the threat of harassment diminished and a sense of order restored. The waitress quietly observed the exchange, her relief growing as the bikers began to settle into silence. She knew that the newcomer's intervention had prevented the situation from escalating further, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Her focus returned to her work, but now there was a renewed confidence in her step, a subtle lightness in her movements that had been absent earlier. The bikers eventually fell silent, unsure of how to proceed. The leader leaned back in his chair, the tension in his shoulders slowly easing. He no longer attempted to provoke the waitress, aware that the newcomer's presence made it unwise to continue. The energy in the diner shifted from tense anticipation to quiet relief, the other diners resuming their conversations with a sense of renewed safety. The waitress continued to serve the remaining tables, her steps steadier, her interactions smoother. She exchanged small smiles with the newcomer, acknowledging his support without words. The subtle connection conveyed her gratitude and relief, a silent recognition of the protection and authority he had provided. As the evening continued, the atmosphere in the diner returned closer to normal. The bikers remained at their table but were subdued, their earlier energy dampened by the newcomer's calm authority. The waitress moved with confidence, attending to her responsibilities while feeling a newfound sense of security. The diner's rhythm resumed, with laughter, conversation, and the clatter of dishes creating a comfortable background. The newcomer stayed nearby, a silent guardian, ensuring that the peace remained intact. The waitress, while still vigilant, felt empowered by his presence and her own ability to maintain composure throughout the tense moments earlier in the evening. By the end of this part of the night, it was clear that the arrival of the newcomer had changed everything. The bikers were no longer a looming threat. The waitress was no longer alone in facing harassment, and the diner itself felt safer. The calm, confident intervention had restored a sense of balance, and the atmosphere shifted from tense anticipation to quiet relief and safety. The waitress had weathered the storm with professionalism, and now with the newcomer's support, she could continue her work in peace, knowing that help had arrived just when it was needed most. The diner had settled into a calm rhythm after the newcomer had intervened. The clatter of dishes, soft conversations, and occasional laughter filled the air once more, but there was a lingering sense of relief that hung over the room. The bikers in the corner booth sat quietly, their earlier bravado replaced by a subdued awareness of the authority that had entered the space. The waitress moved between tables, her steps lighter, her movements smoother, knowing that the worst of the tension had passed. Even so, she remained alert. Experiences like this taught her that calm moments could shift quickly, and she wanted to be ready. She checked on each table with a smile, refilling drinks and delivering plates of food. She was once again fully in her element, interacting with diners who now felt comfortable enough to relax and enjoy their meals. There was a warmth in the atmosphere, a quiet acknowledgement that the threat had been neutralized without chaos. The newcomer stayed nearby, a steady presence in the diner. Occasionally, he would glance toward the bikers who kept their eyes down or focused on their meals, no longer trying to provoke or dominate the space. The waitress felt a quiet sense of gratitude. She knew that the night could have gone very differently, but this man's calm intervention had changed everything. She had felt powerless before, but now, there was a sense of reassurance that allowed her to breathe more freely. One of the bikers finally spoke, his voice lower than before, almost tentative. "We're leaving soon," he said to his companions. The others nodded, and they began gathering their belongings. The leader glanced briefly at the newcomer, then at the waitress, and finally seemed to make a decision to retreat without causing further trouble. The energy in the diner shifted immediately, as if a weight had been lifted. The waitress moved slightly closer to the exit, offering a polite smile to the bikers. "Thank you for visiting," she said calmly, her voice carrying a sense of professionalism and dignity. They gave small nods in return, their previous arrogance replaced by a muted acknowledgement. The leader lingered a moment longer, his eyes meeting hers for a brief second before turning and walking out. The other bikers followed quietly, leaving the diner in silence except for the regular sounds of a normal evening. The other diners released the tension they had been holding, some clapping softly, some whispering comments about the dramatic turn of events. The waitress took a deep breath, allowing herself a moment of relief. The presence of the newcomer had transformed the evening from one filled with discomfort and fear into a night that demonstrated courage, calm, and the power of standing up for others. The newcomer approached the waitress quietly, a small smile on his face. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, his voice calm and steady. She nodded, a grateful smile spreading across her face. "I am now," she replied. She felt a sense of calm wash over her, knowing that she had not faced the situation alone and that the threat had been removed without escalation. She returned to her work, carrying herself with renewed confidence. Each table she served now seemed lighter, filled with customers who felt safer and more relaxed. Her steps were more confident, her movements fluid, and her smiles genuine. The sense of empowerment she felt was subtle but strong, a quiet acknowledgement that she had endured and survived a difficult situation with grace. The staff, who had been quietly observing the situation, exchanged glances and smiles, recognizing the waitress's professionalism and resilience. There was a sense of camaraderie and shared relief, a quiet acknowledgement that they had all witnessed a moment that could have turned dangerous, but instead ended with dignity and calm authority.